Hello everybody and good morning. Welcome to the Yotso Tech Tracks YouTube channel. I wanted to take this opportunity to show everybody my Scangauge 2.0. It is this device right here. I velcroed it to my steering column for easy access. It doesn't block any of my visibility. Basically, this device plugs into your ASDL, which is the assembly line data link. This device works with pretty much all vehicles 1996 and later, because the OBD2, Onboard Diagnostics 2, second generation, came into effect on most vehicles in North America in 1996. And that means the data link connector has to be standardized. It's a 16-pin D-port connector, usually a couple of inches away from the driver's knee, as it has to be in that location. And all manufacturers, from this Ram 1500 truck to, let's say, a 1997 Hyundai or a 2001 Ferrari, 2006 Jeep, they all have to be standardized, as in the communication ports have to be compatible with each other. You take a scan tool and you can plug it in from one vehicle to another. This just made everything simpler, and all the manufacturers had to have the same protocol for the customers and repair facilities to facilitate repairs. This device basically is a scan tool. It is advertised as a fuel economy saver, but I use it for a different purpose. Basically, for what it's advertised for, you can display real-time fuel economy readings, liters per hour, liters per 100 kilometer. You can specify certain parameters inside this device, or you can individualize it to your own vehicle. You can program the fuel economy, you can program the fuel tank size, and each tank, you can reset this device when you fill it up. You can tell this device, for example, how much fuel you used, and it's going to be showing you real time, depending on how you drive, how much your foot is into the gas pedal. It's going to show you real time how much fuel you're using on the spot. It is very accurate because each fuel tank that you use, you go to the gas station, you record on paper, for example, how much fuel you used, and then you tell this Scangauge, you go into the settings and you program it exactly how much fuel you used. So it adjusts based on what it believes you're using, and you're going to be correcting it on real-time fuel use. So the more you use it, the more you drive, the more accurate this device is going to be. As you can see right now, I have 4 parameters on display. On the top left, I am showing engine RPM. As you can see, the engine is running. If you give it a little bit of gas, it changes. It is real-time display. The bottom left, I have TCS, which I programmed this vehicle for torque converter slip. This just gives me an indication when the torque converter is locked. When it is about to lock, I just use that for personal verification of a transmission operation. On the top right, 14.8 15 volts, that is the real-time voltage of the primary batteries. As you may know from different videos I posted here, I do have 2 starting batteries on this vehicle, and they are both connected in parallel right now. So the alternator is charging them both at 14.7, 14.9. That varies based on different loads and different characteristics that the alternator is choosing to charge those batteries at. It is a smart alternator, so it cuts on and off whenever it feels like, however it's programmed, and it's just doing its thing right now. It is charging them. I just started this vehicle not long ago, so I can maintain my gauge visibility here very clearly. In this vehicle, I do have a lot of information on the driver's display. However, I cannot view all the parameters that I would like to, which is the reason I'm using this Scangauge for auxiliary gauges. I got this gauge a very long time ago for my first vehicle that had an automatic transmission, and one of the reasons I got this Scangauge was because I was going to install a large capacity transmission pan and basically a temperature probe that goes into the pan. However, when I looked into the prices of getting a transmission gauge and the sender, and I had to wire the whole thing, I would have to get an A-pillar pod basically for the gauge to make it aesthetically look nice. This Scangauge, I believe it was $100, and it was very comparable to getting one of those permanently mounted gauges. Now, the way this works is, on a lot of vehicles, you have very big selection of parameters that this Scangauge can basically read from the data link connector. It is basically showing you what the computer sees. And in modern vehicles, there are a lot of parameters that are monitored. For example, modern vehicles, they have coolant temperature sensors, crankshaft position sensors, manifold absolute temperatures, manifold absolute pressure, manifold mass airflow sensors, anything basically that the computer monitors. This device, in one way or another, can access those parameters. It does come with many factory preset gauges, such as on the bottom right, I have the degrees Celsius intake air temperature. It is monitoring how much temperature is going into the engine real time. However, you can program custom settings such as this TCS, which is again torque converter slip. Let me cycle you through a couple of these parameters. On the top left, each one of these four gauges basically is able to be reconfigured into whatever the driver would like to view. If I press this button, TPS, throttle position sensor, you can tell right now the engine is idling at around let's say 600-ish RPM. The throttle position sensor is open to 12%, which is just a parameter that you can view. It is electronically controlled throttle, so that is what the computer is commanding right now. Degrees Celsius water temperature. It is basically showing you what up here, the coolant temperature 66, 67. It should be very close to the same about the coolant temperature of the engine. It could be reading two different sensors. I'm not sure why there's a correlation difference between 66 Celsius monitored by the computer and 67. You can see it just went to 67 on the main display. However, like modern vehicles, it could have more than one temperature sensor. One is used for the gauge, one is used for the ECM. Some vehicles have multiple sensors, one in the cylinder head temperature, could be one in the engine block, and so on and so forth. So you can tell right now it's 67 on the display. However, the Scangauge is showing 68. That could just mean that it's reading from a different sensor. The next one, let's say fuel economy average. I haven't programmed this gauge to this vehicle yet, but it will show me live fuel economy readings. TFC, I'm off the top of my head, I'm not sure what that is. Total fuel calculated or something like that. Once again, you have to program it to your vehicle to get very accurate readings. TFT, transmission fluid temperature. Right now it's not showing anything because this gauge got removed from a 2011 Jeep Wrangler with an automatic transmission, and the parameters for this transmission fluid temperature are programmed still for that Jeep. The reason I didn't reprogram it, because as you can see here on the main display, the trans is 10 degrees Celsius. It is showing me in the display the transmission temperature, so I don't want to have two of that same reading, so which is why I don't display it here, but I could if I wanted to. Long-term fuel trim is basically computer parameters. Short-term fuel trip, how much the computer is going to be adding or subtracting fuel for meeting certain criteria. Vehicle torque, once again, that is not something I need to view. However, you can program this gauge to show real-time torque output of the engine. Air-fuel ratio, once again, I don't use that. TCS, once again, it is already displayed here. You can always have two of the same reading, however, I don't see a need to that. HPR, I believe that's horsepower. It is showing you how much the engine is calculated horsepower, how much it is producing right now. It is just idling with no load. CKP, I believe that's crankshaft position. CPK, 15 volts, once again, on the top right, I do have the same reading, so it won't show twice. Degrees Celsius intake air, I already have that displayed. FPR, I believe that is fuel pressure regulator. This vehicle has a returnless fuel system, so there's a electric fuel pump in the tank, and it's pressurizing everything between the tank all the way to the fuel injectors at around 57 psi. It's a good diagnostic tool for if you have fuel pressure problems, for example. This will show you trouble codes. You can get into these specific parameters for diagnostic purposes. It's a very useful little tool. It doesn't take up space. As you can see on the bottom, I velcroed this to many different vehicles and it's still holding up. It's very small. Even in direct sunlight, daylight, I can view this. However, I have this instrument panel right here above that you can see. I have this little cover over it, so direct sunlight never really bothers this gauge. I still am able to see it in direct sunlight, which is one of the reasons I mounted it here. On different vehicles, I did mount this to the headliner. For example, some of the A-pillars are good spots, sometimes in the middle of the dashboard. However, right here, it is not blocking any of the other primary gauges, such as warning lights or anything like that. Liters per hour is displaying now. Ignition advance, I believe this is 11 degrees before top dead center. Roughly the ignition is firing right now, 12 degrees. Load, I believe, again, this is calculated load, just a computer calculation about how much load is being put on the engine. Closed loop, I believe that is just an indication of when the computer is going into a closed loop situation where it is directly looking at the output sensors, the output of the oxygen sensors, to do real-time air-fuel ratio calculations. Again, it's a good diagnostic tool. Sometimes you have trouble with vehicles not going into closed loop for whatever reason. So it'll show you right away if and when it does go into closed loop, which is perfect. Map sensor, again, this vehicle does not have a mass airflow sensor. It is speed density calculated, so the mass manifold absolute pressure is a reading from the intake manifold, how much air-fuel ratio is being calculated real-time by the ECM. Liters per 100 kilometer, I believe. As soon as you get driving, this number will change. However, you do have to program it for accurate readings. Once again, this was in a 2011 Jeep Wrangler, and that had a completely different engine, transmission, vehicle weight, different fuel economy numbers. So when this device gets put in from different vehicles to another vehicle, you do have to change those parameters, which is not difficult at all. You just basically reset it and you drive it, let's say 1 tank, you go to the fuel station, you gas it up, and you record how much fuel you put inside it. And then you go into the settings and you tell it, for example, you gassed up 51.5 liters, then this gauge will know that your driving style and that many kilometers you use that much fuel, and it is going to readjust itself to show you real time how much you are using. And each time you fuel up, it's going to be more accurate because it will learn your driving behavior and it'll learn the engines, transmissions, and the vehicle's behavior to calculate fuel economy much more accurately. It's a good tool to have. Kilometers per hour, the speed, again, my display is able to show that, so if I ever need to. However, most of the time I do only read my speed with this GPS in digital readout. I usually don't look at my speedometer when I'm driving. I just keep an eye on the speed because GPS is very accurate. For example, in places where they have speed cameras and speed limit is an issue, I just usually look at my navigation screen for current speed. I find that very accurate for me. RPM, and back to the normal RPM, is idling at 589 RPM right now, which, as you can tell by the tachometer on the left, it is very accurate. And this device is something I've really learned to trust. The gauges are very accurate. These gauges, I mean in the Scangauge, because they are being real-time displayed by what the computer sees. For example, transmission temperature is monitored inside the valve body, so the transmission temperature, I could program it to view it from the Scangauge. However, my vehicle does show it, which is one less thing I need to put up here. Anything to do with coolant temperatures, intake air temperatures, fuel levels, you can view fuel pressures. For diesel engines, I believe this Scangauge is able to monitor exhaust gas temperatures. It's able to display exhaust regen for your DPF. It is really useful tool. It is not expensive. As I mentioned, I got this many years ago, and this is probably maybe the third or fourth vehicle this Scangauge is inside, and it is working flawlessly. I never had trouble with it. It is very reliable. It is very small, lightweight, simple. It just has, I believe, on one side a Cat5 cable. It is just like a network cable connection on one end, and it goes all the way down. Let me show you here. Right here, this is the ASDL, the assembly line data link. It's the 16-pin D port connector, and that is the one that it plugs into. This Scangauge does not require any batteries because a couple of those pins are electrical power wires. One of them is a 12-volt constant battery voltage, and the other one is a ground. So this Scangauge does power up by itself. When you turn the engine on, as soon as this Scangauge sees a crankshaft position sensor start to turn, it wakes up the computer. As soon as the computer is driving the engine, it gives a signal to this Scangauge II, and it will start to basically show the readings right away. When you shut off your car again, it'll know that the computer is telling it to turn off, and it'll turn off right away. No batteries required, no cables to mess with. Once you plug it in and you find a spot for it, it is pretty much there for as long as you want to keep it there. This gauge is really handy, as I said, for me. I'm able to view real-time parameters, and in the olden days, before stuff like this came out, or if you have a vehicle before 1996 where you had the OBD1, or even prior vehicles that were carbureted and they didn't have any onboard computers, you could come up with a whole bunch of these gauges. However, you have to put probes into the engine for temperature sensors, you have to put a probe into the transmission for transmission temperatures, and anything like that, even a voltage gauge, a voltmeter, you would have to physically get a gauge, mount it somewhere. So after a while, all these gauges, they do tend up to cost a lot of money. You have to find a place to put them, of course. So on a vehicle like this, a modern vehicle, the simplest thing is to get one of these gauges. You stick it in, and you can monitor a whole bunch of stuff that otherwise would be really costly. The price would add up, and you would have to find places to mount them. Popular option is on the A-pillar for a lot of vehicles. However, when you start to put gigantic gauges that you can see, it does block your visibility, or you have to drill into your dash, or through the firewall. You have to put those probes into the exterior or under the hood or anywhere you like to. So this little device is really neat. As I said, I never had trouble with it. I've had it for many years, must be over 10 years now, and it has never missed a beat. It is really neat, really tiny, easy to mount, very easy to program. They have a lot of online informations regarding vehicle specific PIDs, they are called. Each one of these little parameters that are, a lot of them are manufacturer specific. So for this vehicle, for example, one manufacturer specific code, I put in the TCS, which is the transmission, torque converter slip. That is something that I had to program. However, it is not difficult to do. Just a couple of ones and zeros and alphanumeric symbols that you have to tell this gauge to be able to monitor in real time and communicate with the computer that's on board this Ram 1500 truck. Once again, some of those codes are specific to manufacturers, so a lot of these specific codes are really dependent on your vehicle. So each vehicle has the standardized ones. For example, the RPM, the coolant temperature sensors, those, when you plug this device in from vehicle to vehicle, they are all standardized. However, these specific codes, you do have to program them, but it takes maybe a minute or two. Once you get the hang of it, it is really simple to even change these codes. I recommend this thing to anybody. It is really important to be able to view your vehicle real time, and before you have any trouble, for example, overheating issues, or let's say your alternator cut out, this voltmeter, the VLT, will tell you right away. For example, if you're down to driving the vehicle and it is 12 volts, then 11.9, 11.8, 11.7, you could tell right away that your alternator is not charging, and you should probably pull off to the side of the road quickly or return home before you get stranded. Because as soon as your battery voltage goes down in modern vehicles, computers will start cutting out, funny things will happen, fuel pump will not run, and it'll be an expensive tow truck trip home. This thing is come in handy many times. I did have issues in, I believe, an old Volkswagen where I had this gauge, and that exact thing happened. I saw right away the battery voltage is not charging, it is not up, and soon after that, basically that red idiot light came on the dashboard. But once that happens, you're already in trouble. This thing is really nice as far as if you're monitoring temperatures to see something is overheating or not. As I said in the past, where I didn't have transmission temperature readout, this thing is really important for if you're towing. You can make sure that you're not cooking your transmission. You would have to put it into a different gear or drive a different speed where the torque converter clutch would lock, because when you're driving it on the highway unlocked, that does tend to build up a lot of heat no matter what vehicle you have. So that's basically my review and quick information about this Scangauge 2.0. Once again, it is really not expensive for what it does. It can be a lifesaver for any vehicle. as far as you're monitoring very important information that you wouldn't see otherwise. Never assume that everything is fine just because the vehicle's trouble lights don't come on. Usually when those red lights come on, for example an oil pressure light or hot temperature light, once those lights come up, you are already caused damage. And with something like this, you can tell if something is going to be an issue before it becomes an issue. It'll save a lot of money. Again, this Scangauge 2.0 is advertised as a fuel saver device. It can be used for that purpose. However, I never really drive my vehicles hard. I don't abuse them. I like them to last for as long as possible, so I always get good fuel economy no matter what vehicle I drive, just because that always reflects your driving style. Doesn't matter what vehicle you have. You can, for example, have a Toyota Prius that gets horrible gas mileage, and you can have a BMW M3 that gets amazing gas mileage. That's just based on your right foot. Alright, so thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. If you have any questions, let me know below in the comments. I will leave a description about this Scangauge. I will leave a link to it if you guys are interested. I believe this Scangauge has been out for a long time now, and as I said, in my opinion and many other reviews online, this is very reliable. It's not expensive. It is something worthwhile to get into each vehicle. If you do buy another vehicle, for example, this is something that's easily removed. You just take out the cable, take out the Scangauge, and you can put it into whatever else 1996 plus vehicle that you have. So you never really throw it away. It is not vehicle specific. Well, thank you for watching. Give it a thumbs up if you like what you see. More content is coming. Subscribe if you like, and I'll see you next time on the Yotso Tech Tracks YouTube channel. Thank you and bye.